going to be reading from a story called You Never Get It Back, which is a story of mine that appeared in AQR this summer. It's also the title story of my forthcoming short story collection, which is linked by character. And so the whole book follows this same character who we meet in this story, whose name is Kate. So I'm going to read starting at the beginning of the story, so there's really nothing that you need to know. I'll read about the first third of the story, and if you're curious about what happens from there, perhaps you can pick up a back issue of AQR and subscribe. Okay, so You Never Get It Back. A party was being had, and Kate agreed to go. The party would be held in Cambridge, a 5-hour bus ride away from southern Vermont, where she was working part-time in a lab and living with her mother this first year out of college to save money and think about what kind of future she might want. It was a New Year's Eve party. With the arrival of a new millennium came a legitimate, historic feeling reason to panic or celebrate, depending on one's inclination. The whole world was gearing up. Her old college roommate, Esme, called to invite her on December 30th, and because Kate was fighting with her boyfriend, with whom she had planned to spend New Year's Eve, she said yes, though not without hesitation. But Esme begged she didn't want to go alone. She promised Kate that this party would be fun and cheap and attended by Harvard Law School students, including Esme's ex-boyfriend, Paul. Kate and Esme could crash at a studio in the densely populated Harvard-dominated neighborhood behind the law school if a better option failed to present itself. Both of us? Won't it be awkward, Kate asked, and Esme assured Kate that she and Paul had a friendly relationship and they each regarded the other with platonic affection but had moved on, going so far as to suggest perhaps just maybe if this other thing wasn't working out, Kate might be interested in him. No, Kate said, never going to happen. But Esme persisted, saying that Kate would like Paul. He had grown up in a single-parent household in a little town outside Albuquerque, lived in a trailer, was determined to rise from the lower middle class to the upper middle class. Some men in his position would want to be rich, Esme told her, but he's not greedy. He wants a nice life, that's all. Was Esme herself still interested in Paul? Kate couldn't tell. She made a non-committal noise. You're his type, Kate, Esme continued, smart brunette with a working-class background. I was too blonde for him. He called me princess. He hated that I grew up in a bedroom with white carpet. Kate arrived at South Station from Vermont before Esme's Amtrak train came in from the posh town in rural northern New Jersey, where she had grown up. Esme was spending the winter holidays there with her parents, a VP at a pharmaceutical agency, and a real estate agent who were both now semi-retired. Esme considered them her best friends. In her mind, they led audacious, iconoclastic lives. In the 80s, when my father was a lowly bench chemist, she would say, my mother out-earned him. They liked to drink and throw catered parties. Kate towed her luggage from the bus station through the chill wind of the concrete-walled outdoor walkway to South Station's main building, which housed the train station. Waiting in the train station's warm, brightly lit food court, Kate ordered a pepperoni slice from Sbarro and ate the slice with a plastic knife and fork to make it last. An hour to spend here at least. But she had been the one to suggest she wait. Go along to Cambridge when you arrive, Esme had said. Paul will be happy to see you. Kate wished she had a cell phone. If the train was delayed, how would she know? She would have to ask the desk agent. The big clock by the black arrivals board read 2:07 p.m. Esme's train was due in at 3:05 p.m. She read a back issue of Structure until 2:55 p.m. and went to the platform to stretch her legs. Outside, the sky was already darkening. A light snowfall drifted down from the flat gray vault, the wind picking up the dry flakes on the platform and eddying the snow in small twists like a peel of lemon in a cocktail. The pale light had a muffled quality, as if strained through white gauze. Would the party be fun? She gave it a 50-50 chance. A small regret moved through her. She would prefer to be in New York with Michael, but he hadn't called, and what could she have done? Gotten the ski resort's address from his mother and shown up unannounced? No. And anything was better than sitting home on New Year's Eve worried and humiliated and preparing to break up with him unless he had a truly dazzling explanation for his behavior. 2 trains arrived on parallel tracks. Passengers disembarked into the cold air, stamping their feet and chafing their hands. "Rumi," Esme's voice came from behind her. Esme liked to call her this, as if to reinforce the source of their unlikely bond. Their junior year at Williams, they'd roomed together, matched up by the housing office, when Kate's freshman and sophomore year roommate transferred to Yale and Esme transferred in. Before going their separate ways senior year, Kate to a co-op and Esme to an off-campus apartment, they'd grown unexpectedly close. Kate listened to Esme's romantic worries and reassured her about her academic papers, which Esme gave to Kate to read, and after hearing her responses, relentlessly revised into perfection. Esme, in turn, took offense on Kate's behalf when she felt Kate had been slighted, and insisted Kate stand up for herself when a professor failed her on an exam when she was in the infirmary with strep throat. She helped Kate with money, too. She had bought Kate's second semester school books on her parents' credit card, knowing the book's expense was a hardship, and insisting her parents didn't mind when Kate tried to refuse what seemed too large a gift. And now, unlikely a pair though they were, they stood greeting each other in South Station on the cusp of a new millennium. Small and bird-boned, Esme struggled along the wet platform with an oversized Chanel duffel bag. She dropped the bag to embrace Kate. The 2 women let out a joint shriek of happiness, or a performance of happiness. And Esme said, "Hi, hi, hi, oh, you look great." As Kate said, "You're here." A businessman in his 40s trailed Esme. "Kate, this is Duncan," she said triumphantly, pulling away and turning to acknowledge him. "Duncan, my brilliant roommate, Kate." Esme collected men. She was good at it. "Nice to meet you," the man said. To Esme, "Where are you headed? I can give you a hand with that bag." The businessman walked them to the red line. He left the bag at the turnstiles, hoisting it over to Esme after she passed through the steel arms. "Can you get it? I can carry it to the platform if you'd like," he said, nodding toward the glass window behind which sat a tea official to indicate he could buy a token. "No need," Esme said, "but thank you." Kate dragged her own dingy roller bag, taking care not to dirty it further. The pink fabric showed all stain. The wheels were wet from slush. Snow clung to the bag, and as Esme took the man's card and made a general promise to call if she found a free minute for lunch while she was in town, Kate brushed away the white accumulation with her bare hand, the warmth melting the snow so the fabric grew damp, pink deepening to a dusky rose. Their first semester as roommates, the 2 had seen each other a little. Esme had spent many weekends away in New York City visiting Paul, who worked for a public policy think tank. He was 5 years older. Kate had never met him. He and Esme had split up that November because Esme had fallen for a lanky, wealthy member of the lacrosse team, though really Kate suspected the problem had been Esme's jealousy of Paul's ex-girlfriend, a model, and Paul's resistance to Esme's plans, which involved moving to Princeton and settling down into a life like her parents, in a community that seemed to demand one strive for more while pretending to think of oneself as a success. Kate was busy with schoolwork, trying to salvage a faltering attempt to double major in physics and chemistry, a choice she was beginning to doubt was a good one, though it had qualified her for several scholarships. But that spring, the 2 shared an English class. Kate enjoyed the short stories the professor assigned. She tended to sympathize with the women in these stories, and she tired of the boys in the class making comments like, "She's so self-pitying," about a girl dating a married man, even though the girl blamed only herself and was self-deprecatingly funny about her regrets. Or, "I'd be out of there," about a grieving wife mourning a stillborn baby and shaken by a carjacking, who began to suffer an extreme fear of break-ins. Or about the bullying, patronizing, passive-aggressive young American man in Hills Like White Elephants, a character even Hemingway didn't much seem to like, as he, the young man, pushed his girlfriend, Jig, into having an abortion. "He's being rational. He just wants a straight answer, but she's being so emotional about it." "What does she mean when she says you never get it back?" one went on. "She hasn't even lost anything." The professor, a new assistant professor about the age of the fictional grieving wife, smiled when the boys made these comments and left it to the girls in the class to take up the cudgel for empathy, for feminism. Esme was unafraid in this regard. Her good looks and intellectual competence shielded her from the boys' dismissal or ridicule. She had recently been introduced to critical theory, too, and she liked to talk about homosocial triangles. And because no one knew what she meant, they were cowed into silence. This had interested Kate. Kate suspected that Esme regarded her with her scholarship and work-study job in the lab and what Esme might call her disadvantaged background as a charity case. But despite this, Kate felt an affection for her. Esme was smart and could be generous. Kate spent the first 2 months of the fall semester evading Esme's questions about her family, choosing not to disclose how much they'd struggled after her father left. But when her mother called one night, worried about money and in fact sounding suicidal, and Esme overheard the conversation and the subsequent call to Kate's aunt, the plea for intervention, she was tactful and compassionate. The fact that she regarded Kate as exotic held an appealing innocence. Riding the T to Harvard Square, Esme told Kate about graduate school. She was studying English at Stanford, a decision over which she had agonized. Accepted at all the top schools, she'd gone into a tailspin and called Kate crying, barely able to choke out, "Harvard and Yale are both so good, but the theorist I most want to work with is Terry Castle." Kate had been torn between sympathy and distaste. Esme was so afraid, beneath her confidence, of failing. Once at Stanford, she asked to be assigned to the medical school dorm so she could meet a doctor. She reported without irony that her mother's advice was to sit on the medical school steps reading a book. But the dorms are better, she'd said, more casual, more points of contact. Kate thought Esme should go to business school. Forget teaching, her mind was tuned to strategy. She would perhaps be best suited to running the free world. I talked to my advisor last week, and he thinks I should learn German and write my dissertation on this one medieval dramatist named Roswitha. I could focus on how her plays relate to our gendered conception of innocence, using Eve Sedgwick as a lens text. Do you want to learn German? Esme had begun as a Henry James scholar. Her true fondness was for romantic stories of American girls abroad. Esme shrugged. Sure, my advisor says it's my best chance at being competitive for jobs. What happened to James? He's overdone. Kate knew little about PhDs in the humanities and the academic job market. Still, it struck her as silly to focus on an area in which you weren't all that interested if you were going to study the topic for 5 or more years and go on to teach it. About Esme, Michael had remarked, she learns things to have information to lord over you in conversation, not because she actually wants to know. He was an economics major in his senior year at Cornell and planned to work in finance. He believed that money was power, and that was what he wanted. His view of the world was unduly cynical, Esme frequently remarked to Kate, but too often he was proven right. How is UMass? Esme asked. Kate worked 20 hours a week in a lab on campus researching DNA, or rather as a technician in support of the postdocs and the scientists who did the research. Her increased work-study hours and flagging grades had forced her to drop the chemistry major in her senior year, minoring instead. So after graduating with her physics degree, she'd sought research experience. It was an hour drive and she shared the car with her mother, so she scheduled herself for the longest days possible. Her job was to help carry out crystallographic analysis by cleaning and prepping equipment, tedious but necessary tasks. She was saving for a deposit on an apartment and applying to full-time jobs in Boston and New York. You know, fine, the work is a little rote, but it's going to be until I get an advanced degree. It's good to be around these scientists and see how they got where they are and what they like and don't like about the job. And Michael, what a shit. I know, but maybe he has a good reason. There is no reason good enough. Kate knew Esme was right. Things with Michael were complicated, though. He made her laugh, and he was genuine and angry in a way she liked. Why anger drew her, she didn't know. Esme located men she could control. Kate chose men she could not. Perhaps it had to do, she speculated, with Esme's love of constructing a good story, as opposed to her own curiosity about the results of an experiment. By the time they arrived at Paul's building, darkness had fallen. The wind gusted. Kate could swear the temperatures had dropped 10 degrees in the 15 minutes between when they emerged from underground at the Harvard Square station and now. A winter storm advisory was in effect, Esme said. They were lucky to have made it to Paul's before the snow began in earnest. She pressed his buzzer, holding it an extra second as Kate shivered. The wind whipped her hair into her mouth. Her nose ran. They waited. Esme pressed the buzzer a second time, and a loud buzz issued forth. The door lock clicked open. The women climbed a narrow, dim flight of stairs, bags bumping behind them as a man Kate assumed was Paul opened a door 5 flights above and waited in the doorway. Sorry, he called down. I don't have my keys, and it'll lock behind me. That's fine, Esme called up, giving a brittle laugh that said it obviously wasn't. Kate paused on the second-story landing, rearranged her grip on the bag. Esme stopped behind her. My duffel isn't too heavy, Esme called, but Kate has an actual suitcase. Do you want to find your keys? Of course, he said. Hold on a sec. Esme set her bag on the landing and waited for Paul. He retrieved his keys and bounded down the stairs. He hugged Esme, who responded with tepid enthusiasm, until he lifted her in the air, at which point she relented and seemed pleased by the flattering attention. After lowering her, he shook Kate's hand. His grasp was warm. Now disarrayed, his longish brown hair fell across his forehead. She took in his undeniable good looks, pleasantly crooked nose that might once have been broken, a mouth that suggested good humor and intelligence. When he smiled at her, she wanted to smile back. Here, he said, I'll get these. And he lifted the 2 bags and carried them up the remaining 3 flights of stairs in that effortless way that surprised Kate, even though she knew to expect it from them. They were stronger. And yet it was hard to look at her bag and see a thing that could be easy to lift. It necessitated looking at a suitcase and seeing in its place a lighter object, a pillow, a microscope, a slide. She envied that ability to act on the world. Paul wore gray sweatpants and a t-shirt, and she could see Esme examining this choice critically. Esme liked her men well dressed. For a holiday, she gave them clothes she wanted them to wear, and then complimented them encouragingly for wearing the sweaters and button-downs, soliciting other people's approval. Don't you think Marcus looks handsome in this shirt? She would ask friends, or doesn't this lilac make Jake's eyes look so blue? And what could one say but yes? The men Esme dated usually seemed to expect this and were happy to humor her. The ones who resisted didn't last long. Such agency to shape a person to your will and to refuse them if they did not yield. Paul had refused to yield. The studio was small but neat. Paul put their bags by a faded maroon futon couch. A television opposite the couch provided a focal point. Beside it stood a small bookshelf with legal books. Adjacent to the kitchen, a desk was wedged in the dining nook, where a kitchen table should go, a green-shaded lamp emitting soft light. Paul went to get them drinks. Beer or wine, he asked the women. I haven't been properly domesticated, he added, nodding to the desk. I eat on the couch if I eat here, which is rare, but please note, I did clean up for you two. Esme wandered toward the kitchen, where Paul stood uncorking a bottle of wine, and peeked through the open door to the bedroom. Kate joined her, hanging back a little. The studio was not a true studio. In fact, it was 2 rooms, though the bedroom was closet-sized. Clean sheets, he said. Look, there's even a decorative pillow. The futon's murder. I'll take it. Or we can all sleep in the bed. At this, Esme turned to him and said, someone's getting ahead of himself. Paul laughed an easy, perhaps flirtatious laugh. Baby doll, he said, since you broke my heart, I haven't even allowed myself to dream of you. You ruined me, you know, gutted me like a fish. Please, she said. She's a heartbreaker, this one, he called to Kate. Emerging from the kitchen area with 2 glasses of red wine, he distributed to the women. He smiled and announced, I'm going to hop in the shower. The day got away from me. I thought we'd grab a bite to eat before the party. There's a great cheap place around the corner. You two like Middle Eastern? Mollified by the flirtation, Esme said yes. Kate was relieved. Cheap was good. Each week she saved as much of her small paycheck as she could, so she might afford a deposit on an apartment. But most of the money went to cover her portion of the telephone bill and bus fare to see Michael, and to her mother, who insisted Kate didn't have to pay rent, but who appreciated the help. Her disability check only went so far, and after the 2nd month without enough heat, Kate started chipping in, even though her mother protested. They both knew it was the only reasonable option. Esme enjoyed nice restaurants and tended to suggest expensive places. Worries about money she met with, "This is the one time we're here," or "We work hard, we deserve this," or "In 5 years, whatever we spend on this meal is going to seem like such a pitifully small amount of money," which Kate sincerely hoped was true. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.